Praise God, give thanks to the Father in all that you say and do. Well, amen. Amen.
There's an interesting story that we find in Judges chapter 11. And we're going to be looking at Judges 11 and 12 just briefly, because there's something there I think that we can benefit from. I know it was something I had not thought about before when I was reading through here a few weeks ago and reading that. A lot of times we think about the story about Jephthah and about that rash vow that he makes. And he does make one. He makes a very rash vow. And he is going out to this great battle, and he's going against the Ammonites. And they've been oppressing and they've been threatening and all of that. And he was brought in. He was sort of in exile. And Jephthah was brought in to lead the battle. And so he says this in verse 30. And Jephthah made a vow to the Lord and said, if you will indeed deliver the people of Ammon into my hands, then it will be that whatever comes out of the doors of my house to meet me when I return in peace from the people of Ammon shall surely be the Lord's, and I will offer it as a burnt offering. Now, I don't know what he was thinking. I don't know. But he thought this was something that he needed to say as he was going into this very important battle. And so that's what he says. He gets home. The Lord grants him victory. When Jephthah came to his house at Mizpah, there was his daughter coming out to meet him with timbrels and dancing, and she was his only child. Beside her, he had neither son nor daughter. And it came to pass when he saw her, he tore his clothes and said, Alas, my daughter, you have brought me very low. You are among those who trouble me. For I have given my word to the Lord, and I cannot go back on it. What a terrible dilemma he was in. And you know, to the daughter's credit, she actually encourages him to do whatever it was he says to the Lord, you've got to do that. And the debate can continue about, did he really offer his daughter as a burnt offering? I would say no. But he offered her completely in the sense, as it goes on to say in the story, that she remained a virgin the rest of her life. She could never marry. And so that's the part we usually hear about. But there's another side of this story that I think we need to look into in chapter 12, in Judges chapter 12. The Ephraimites were a tribe of Israel. They were angry. And they were angry because they didn't get to participate in this battle against the Ammonites. And probably what they were really angry about, that meant they didn't get any of the spoils. See, that was important. And so they're angry. So, oh, you just didn't call us and we didn't get to take part, like they would have been right there. I tell you, the spoils of war, though, were important. Let's just talk about that for a minute before we get back into the story. Because when you were in the army that won, you were the victorious army, that you were probably underpaid. And the way you really made something from taking your life in your own hands to go and join these battles, sometimes they were mercenaries. And that's the only pay they got, was what spoils they could take from those that they defeated. But if you were in an army like of Israel or some other country, then you would be paid a wage plus some of the spoils of the war. That sort of gave you an incentive to make sure you get out there and that you win. And so it was really a big supplement to what little bit they probably got paid. But it was also a psychological element of the victory. You had completely dominated your enemy to the point you took what they had. Sometimes that was in some gruesome ways. But still, that was part of the spoils of war. You know, Moses talked about that. And I'm going to mark my place here in Judges 12. But Moses delivered this to the children of Israel about these spoils of war. In Deuteronomy chapter 20, and down in verse 13. He says, now when the Lord your God delivers it into your hands, you shall strike every male in it with the edge of the sword. But the women, the little ones, the livestock, and all that is in the city, all its spoil, you shall plunder for yourself, and you shall eat the enemy's plunder which the Lord your God gives you. This you shall do to all the cities which are very far from you, which are not of the cities of those nations. And so the cities of those nations, they didn't spare anybody. But if it was far off, here's what you can do. So the spoils of war were just a given, but they were regulated. And in fact, David adds another requirement to that in 1 Samuel chapter 30, when his men had gone and retaken what had been taken from them. And so they've got the spoils there. Well, some of the men stayed back to guard the supplies. The rest of the men went to fight the enemy. And the ones who went to fight the enemy didn't want to share anything with the ones who guarded the supplies. And David said, no, everybody who had part in this will share alike. And he made it a statute from that day. He made it an ordinance. And so just saying that the spoils of war were common, it was a common practice that you would benefit from that. But here's what the Ephraimites were doing. They were wanting the spoils of war, but not the battle. Now, they complained that they were not asked, but were they telling the truth about that? And so in Judges chapter 12, in verse 1, the men of Ephraim were angry for not being asked to take part of the battle. And then Jephthah reminds them, he said, oh no, he said, we asked you to join. Going back to Judges chapter 12, in fact, they had threatened to burn down the house. We're going to burn your house down, Jephthah, because you didn't ask us to come take part of this great victory that you've won. And Jephthah said to them, my people and I were in a great struggle with the people of Ammon, and when I called you, you did not deliver me out of their hands. In other words, I tried to get you to come, and you wouldn't come. The battle still had to be fought. In verse 3, so when I saw that you would not deliver me, I took my life in my hands and crossed over against the people of Ammon, and the Lord delivered them into my hand. Why then have you come up this day to fight against me? Like, what are you thinking, you Ephraimites? Well, again, they wanted the results of the victory, but they didn't want to go into the battle. The Lord gave them victory. And because they didn't take part, they had no right to the spoils. They had no reason to be angry. They weren't there. They didn't take part. Well, I think there's a principle that we can benefit from in this. Are we guilty of doing much the same thing? When we're wanting the benefit of something that we didn't take part in, aren't we doing the same thing? We want the results of the battle of the war, but we don't want the battles. But aren't we in a battle? As Christians, we are in a battle. Aren't we soldiers of the Lord? A couple of passages to look at. In Ephesians chapter 6. In Ephesians 6. What is it that we are supposed to put on, spiritually speaking? Is it not the whole armor of God? Armor suggests battle, doesn't it? Finally, my brethren, in Ephesians 6, verse 10, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. Put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. And he goes on from there to talk about what each piece was and what it represented. Ends up saying also to pray. And so we are in this great spiritual battle. And then in part of that, as he gets toward the end of this passage, he says in verse 19, and for me that utterance may be given to me, that I may open my mouth boldly to make known the mystery of the gospel. Paul said, I want to do what I'm supposed to do in this great battle, to make known the gospel. And then in 2 Timothy, when he's writing to the young preacher, and he says in 2 Timothy 2 and verse 3, you therefore must endure hardship as a good soldier of Jesus Christ. So we're in a battle. But I tell you, sometimes I think we're AWOL. Sometimes we withdraw ourselves maybe from parts of the battle. Like, well, I'll do this, but I'm not going to do this other. But we want to be saved. We want the victory, don't we? But are we willing to join the battle? And I don't mean thinking you've got to do something you're not able to do. That's not what I mean. But I mean those who just kind of pull back and watch and just let the events unfold, and they're not really participating in whatever it is that they could be. And so, speaking of the virus, it's kind of like wanting to be virus-free, but I'm not doing all this social distancing. Well, the two may not go together, had they? You know, you got to do your part. Here's a for instance. What about church growth? Everybody wants the church to grow. That's part of the battle, isn't it? But what are we willing to do to participate in the battle? In Matthew 28, in verse 19, the Lord said, "Go, therefore, into all the world, preach the gospel." The Lord said to go. And I think some versions, I think the King James says, "Go ye." And I've often heard it said, "Go ye" means go me. Go therefore and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I have commanded you. And lo, I'm with you always, even to the end of the earth. There's a lot of verses that talk about that. And so we want the church to grow. We want all of that, and we want to be able to say, "Oh yeah, the church is doing good, church is growing." But what are we doing to help with that? Let me mention, while I'm thinking about that right now, that I'm trying something new, and I encourage you to kind of help me with this if you'd like to. But I'm going to be making these available anyway. And I ordered this neat little card here. And what it is, it says free Bible course, free Bible correspondence course. Now, not everybody will be able to do what this asks to be done. It's really targeted at people who know what it's talking about. And that is, it says on here, "Scan me." It's called a QR code. And if you have a smartphone, which majority of people do, and you've got a little scanner app on it, which most people have one, and if you scan that in, it takes you to our Bible correspondence courses. And so what you can do with these is a very passive way of being involved in spreading the gospel. You can, when you get out of your car at Walmart, you can stick this on the person next door's window. If you're eating at a restaurant, you get up and leave the table, you can leave that on the table. If you're in a doctor's office, you can leave some where everybody else does often. They're easy to leave somewhere. And that's all it says. And it's very eye-catching, I hope. The purpose of it is, I get a lot of requests for our Bible correspondence courses, but they come from everywhere, which is good, but they don't come from here. And so what I'm hoping is to put a lot of these cards out here and maybe encourage some to enroll in our courses, and maybe we can find someone that we can help in sharing the gospel. That's just one way you can be involved in church growth and evangelism. You can be part of the battle. Another thing that sometimes I've seen parents do is they want good children, but that effort part, that's maybe something they're not too involved in. And sometimes one parent seems to bear all the load, where it takes two parents. So in Ephesians 6 and verse 4, it says, you fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and the admonition of the Lord. You've got to train up your children. In Proverbs 22 and verse 6, train up a child in the way that he should go, and when he's old, he will not depart from it. Train up involves effort and consistency. And it's not the easy route, it's the harder route. It's easier just to say yes and let them go. Where sometimes you need to say no and stick to it. But we want good children, but sometimes the effort is not there. And then sometimes people will complain because they didn't get a job. And it's like, well, did you put the effort in? Were you engaged in the battle? And so in Ecclesiastes 9 and verse 10 talks about, let me see, I'll misquote it here because it has left my mind for the moment. In Ecclesiastes 9 And in verse 10, whatever your hand finds to do, do it with your might, for there is no work or device or knowledge or wisdom in the grave where you are going. And then Colossians 3 and verse 23. He talks about doing our work heartily as unto the Lord. We won't turn there just for the sake of time. But don't you know people who are disappointed that they didn't get a promotion, or they're disappointed they didn't get offered a certain kind of a job, and yet you look at their work record and they're not doing their work heartily as unto the Lord. They're not doing their work with all their might. They work when somebody's looking and they don't when somebody's not looking, all of that. Well, you've got to be in the battle, don't you, if you expect to be victorious and enjoy the spoils of the war. And so there are many things you can think of. What about a good marriage? You want a good marriage? Most people, oh yeah, I want my marriage to be good. And yet there's little attention to being loving, nourishing, cherishing, and respecting each other, as we read about in Ephesians chapter 5. So if you want a good marriage, you've got to do your part. You've got to love one another. You've got to nourish, and you've got to cherish, and you've got to respect, if you want that marriage to be what the Lord wants it to be. And then everybody wants to go to heaven, but so often the battle, that's the part that maybe not so much. We'll turn to Matthew chapter 16. Matthew chapter 16. That is the ultimate victory, isn't it? A home in heaven. But it's a battle. Oh, you don't earn your way, but you're a soldier. You're in the battle. You've got battles to fight as you live here, getting ready to go to heaven. So in Matthew chapter 16 and verse 24, Jesus said to his disciples, if anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever desires to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. For what profit is it to a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? Or what will a man give in exchange for a soul? We all want to go to heaven. We've got to stay in the battle if we want to enjoy the spoils of victory. There are principles that are always true. The Bible is full of those. The Bible often teaches in principle. And we take those principles and we apply it in many different ways. One of those is you reap what you sow. And we all sow something. In Galatians 6 and verse 7 it says, be not deceived. So don't fool yourself into somehow thinking you can reap one thing and you can sow one thing and reap something else. And so if we're wanting to go to heaven, we've got to sow the right actions. If we want a good marriage, we've got to sow the attention that it takes. If we want good children, we've got to sow the consistency that it takes to raise up a child like that. And on you could go. Don't be deceived into thinking you can sow one thing and reap something else. Don't be deceived that you can enjoy the spoils of the battle, of the war, and not engage in the battle. And then, isn't it another way of saying that faith without works is dead, being alone, as we read about in James chapter 2? Don't think you can just sit on the sideline while the battle is going on, and then when the victory is won, well, let me step in there and enjoy my part too. Just doesn't work that way. Never has, never will. This is a quote that I've heard a lot. To the victor go the spoils. I saw this little cartoon, and I think it sort of illustrates what we've been talking about. So as the saying goes, to the victor go the spoils. Then we just fire victor and keep the spoils. And that's the attitude of many. And so this whole idea, wanting the spoils of war but not the battle, that's just not God's way. Heaven is our reward for being in the Lord's army.
Soon and very soon we are going to see the King. Soon and very soon we are going to see the King. Soon and very soon we are going to see the King.